We greet you with much love, and we are here today to speak of some energetic dynamics in relationships, in partnerships, and in the dance and flow between lovers, between men and women, but it can also apply to same-sex couples. So today we would love to look at 3 life areas that could be rather interesting for many of you in this group today. We'd love to look at the importance of and the connection between receptivity, grounding, and boundaries. If these areas are unclear to you, if you've got something muddled up in any of these areas or in all of these areas, you might be likely to struggle in your romantic life, in your dating life, in your dance with your lover, or with the absence of your lover. So, grounding, boundaries, and receptivity are rather connected. When we look at the energy of a lot of spiritual people who meditate a lot and who love channelings, who either channel themselves or listen to a lot of channelings, when we look at the energy of people who are givers, helpers, healers, lovers, often their energy is a lot more in the upper half of the body than in the lower half of the body. And often it's a lot more in the head than in the rest of the upper half of the body. And sometimes it can be in the upper half of the head, or in the upper 10% of your head, or even above your head. Some people who are really into spirituality, meditation, energy work, you very much live outside of your body a lot of the time. You very much live in a subtle, disembodied energy world. In other words, a lot of people on the spiritual path could greatly benefit from more grounding. When you're ungrounded, you might find it difficult to focus, not to forget things. You might develop physical symptoms, you might be exhausted, you might have insomnia, you might have difficulty connecting with your surroundings, you might have a feeling that life is passing you by without you really participating in it, and you might have some other symptoms and experiences of ungroundedness. But these are some of the very common ones. And another common symptoms of not quite being as grounded as you could, as often as you could be, is that magnetizing what you want and need, or manifesting what you want and need, doesn't come to you as easily as it could. In other words, if you are more in your thoughts, in your dreams, in your feelings, in your mental body, in your emotional body, but rather disconnected from your physical body, then whatever it is you desire and ask to come into your life can't quite reach you or find you on a physical level. So quite a few of you in this group came here tonight with the question, why is my mate still not here? I have called him in so many times. I've asked, I've prayed, I've done all sorts of exercises and practices and prayers and meditations and manifestation lists, and I've read books on how to do this. I've been to seminars on how to call him in. What's going wrong? That was some of your questions in this group. And we would like to say, maybe he's already here, but you're not here. If you're ungrounded, if you're disconnected from your physical body or from aspects of your physical body. You might have walked right past him. You might have been in the elevator with him. You might have been in the queue in front of him. You might have sat next to him in an exam. You might have been breathing the same air as he did without noticing, because you weren't quite present. You might have been a bit spaced out. You might have been a little bit in your dreams. You might have been thinking about solving a problem really, really hard. You might have walked past him in the streets, and he might have smiled at you again and said hello to you again. And by the time you noticed, oh, there he was again, there's this guy who I find really attractive. By the time you've started to pay attention, well, the lights are green again and he's crossed the road and he's off. And it might be 2 weeks till you run into each other again. So when you're a little bit ungrounded, your responses are much slower. When you're somewhere else in your thoughts and he's there, it takes you so long to smile back at him that by the time your smile has finally arrived on your face, he has already begun to think, oh, she clearly isn't interested. She looked really serious. Because most likely he doesn't know that you're simply a little bit ungrounded and that you've been thinking about other things. Most likely he would have interpreted your lack of attention as, I'm clearly not interesting to her, otherwise she would have started to pay some attention. And of course, magnetizing, being magnetic, manifesting, it's not just about your perfect mate. It'll also be so much easier for you to manifest abundance, more money, the things you need, the things you desire, some of the things you want, by being grounded. Because how could you draw anything towards you and into your physical reality if you're not quite participating in your own physical reality just yet? So one commitment you could take from today's call could be, if you chose to, I'm going to be here. I'm going to be grounded. I'm going to pay more attention. I'm going to be on planet Earth no matter what. I'm going to participate over here. Some of you are ungrounded because you're exhausted, because you're tired. And this group here tonight is a group of givers. You give and you give and you give. And when you've given a lot, guess what you do? You give some more. And guess what happens if someone is in the flow of give some more, give some more, give some more, give too much, give too much, give too much, give too much again, always give too much, stuck in a pattern of giving too much, being identified with being the giver, give. Guess what happens when you're in that trap? It becomes a prison. You start to think, that's who I am, that's all my life is about, that's all I can have. Not in your mind, not consciously. In your mind you might get angry and you might think, why is my life so hard? Why am I working so hard? Why are things so tough? Why am I working harder than anybody else? But on a deeper level, if you give and give and give and do nothing else for 21 days or longer, it becomes an ingrained habit. And give is just as imbalanced as daytime without nighttime. It's just as imbalanced as be awake with no sleep. It's just as imbalanced as the yin without the yang. It's as imbalanced as one extreme without the other. It's just as extreme as the in-breath without the out-breath. So give is draining for you. And when you're drained, it doesn't feel good. And in order to avoid the fact that it doesn't feel good, you then tend to disconnect from the bad feeling. And where is the bad feeling? Of course, it's in your body. It's in your cells. If you're drained, the exhaustion can kind of hurt. Your limbs can hurt. There can be tension. There can be all sorts of aches and pains, hormonal imbalances, etc. So you rather choose to disconnect. And then, of course, that makes matters worse, because then your natural alarm signals cannot be noticed, because you've stopped paying attention. And then you're stuck in a paradox. Check in with yourself why you give so much and why you have been giving so much for such a long period of time, for such an extended period of time. And a lot of givers, not all of you in this group here, but a lot of givers give in order to receive love. They haven't learned another way to ask for love or to call love in. So their logic is, if I give to you, if I give a lot to you, if I give to you much more than I have, much more than I could afford, surely you will give back to me. And have you ever thought about how illogical that is, how risky that is, how imbalanced and unwise that can be? It's a bit as if you went to the bank and you took out all your money and all your savings and all your overdraft till your account was on minus as much as you can overdraw your account, just totally every penny gone, and you took that amount of money in cash, went out into the streets and handed it out to random passers-by till all your money was gone, and then you'd stand there and wait. You'd stand there and wait for people to give you something in return. And if no one did, you'd be really upset. Can you see how that doesn't work? Of course it doesn't. You can clearly see that. Yet when you do the same, exactly the same, not with money, but with your energy, with your life force, with the energy that's been given to you in order to have a life, to be in a body, to have an experience on planet Earth. When you do that with your life force energy, then you see things differently, and then you don't notice that this strategy, this method, is very dangerous and very risky and doesn't work, and that it's kind of irresponsible, and that you're not really taking care of yourself. So if you give, and you give some more, and you give more than you have, you're kind of borrowing energy from your future, and you're running on empty, and you are exhausted as a consequence of that. And not only does the quality of your giving decrease then, but you also become resentful. And then you also become a dubious energy for others, because they sense something in her energy isn't quite right here. And they sense, I personally cannot put my finger on it, but this energy is imbalanced. I won't trust that energy. They don't judge you, they don't see what you're doing or why you're doing it. It's more of an instinctive form of protecting themselves, of getting energetically tangled up with someone who has an imbalance going on. So our suggestion is to stop taking out all of your energy savings and spreading it amongst everyone apart from yourselves. Our suggestion is, please pause and keep your energy for yourself. We don't say become greedy or stingy or selfish. We're simply saying don't spend all you've got. An interesting parallel is that people who spend too much of their life force energy often tend to spend more money than they can afford to spend as well. And then there's this double parallel going on. So if you're spending too much of energy in one way or another, it can be an interesting lesson of self-care. And guess what happens when you take really good care of yourself? You're more attractive, you're more radiant, you're more magnetic, and what you desire comes to you. When you practice really good self-care, you're the honeypot, and all the bees fly towards you. And then you get to choose which bee is invited to land and which bee is going to be told thank you, but no thank you. And there we are with boundaries. That's where the boundaries come in. We're also inviting you to pay attention to the moments in which you say yes and the moments during which you say no. And we're inviting you to do something very simple that you all know how to do, but that most of you forget. Some of you forget this nearly every day. It's simple, you know how to do it, and it's as simple as say yes when you mean yes, and say no when you mean no. And that will help you to not be drained, because if you say yes when you mean no, you're also being drained, and when you're drained you lose grounding, and when you lose grounding you lose presence, and you already know what happens next. When you love yourself, you know that you deserve to have boundaries. When you have respect for yourself, you know that you haven't come to this planet to do things you would never choose to do things that are unloving or disrespectful to yourself, or that are exhausting for yourself. And some of you have learned in the past that it feels as if you received love when you disrespected your own boundaries. Some of you have had experiences with other people who were greedy or demanding, or who lacked a lot of energy themselves, and because of their lack they started to take energy from you, or they started to demand that you'd give them energy you didn't have, energy you couldn't spare. But because it felt so good when they said thank you, when they smiled, when they looked happier than before, you kind of felt like, oh, it's worth it. They're so happy now. It's much easier to be around them now. When they're grumpy and moody, it's really challenging to remain around them. But when they demand a lot from me and I say yes, even when a huge part of me means no, then my interaction with them is easier and less intimidating and less threatening. So a fearful aspect, an aspect within you that might have temporarily forgotten about your own worth, that aspect might have developed a habit of saying yes when you mean no. So we're asking everybody here, please check in with yourselves. How are my boundaries? How well am I supporting myself, looking after myself, taking care of myself? Am I taking care of myself first and others second, or the other way around? Am I leaking energy, spilling energy in order to take care of others? Or am I coming from a place of fullness and from having so much to give that I genuinely can afford to share. None of you would empty out your entire bank account till the overdraft, till the limit of the overdraft, if someone asked you, give me all of your money please. You wouldn't do that. But interestingly enough, with your energy, with your life energy, with your love energy, with that, a lot of you feel obliged to give all you've got and to do the same the next day and the next day and the next day. Some of you have the habit of exhausting yourselves to the limit every single day, to drop to bed in exhaustion once you've given everything, once you've spent yourself, plus your energy overdraft. And that energy, that exhausted, drained, tired energy, that does not attract a mate. Neither the one you're with, if you're with someone, nor the one you're going to meet in the future. Drained, exhausted, washed out energy doesn't attract romance, love, partnership, sexuality. Very much the opposite. It repels it. And when you give and give and give, and then you give some more and so forth, what happens is you become not only drained, washed out and exhausted, but if that goes on for some time, you could even become needy. And none of you, absolutely none of you, would ever want to be needy. That's the last thing you want to be, because all of a sudden then you could be perceived as if you yourself were just another energy vampire, because a drained, tired, washed out, exhausted person can then be draining for the others, and then you'd repel what you want to attract. So we're here to ask you, whenever you're on empty, washed out, drained and exhausted, please stop, please pause, please sleep, please recharge, and please feel where you're at in all honesty and take good care of yourself. Having boundaries is simple. It simply means taking care of yourself, having a glass of water when you're thirsty, having sleep when you're tired, eating when you're hungry, saying yes when you mean yes, and no when you mean no, and I don't know yet when you don't know yet. It's really, really, really simple. Boundaries is as simple as knowing who you are, knowing where you are, knowing what you need, and having the clarity, the insight, and the courage to communicate that. Some of you don't communicate your boundaries because you're scared of adverse reactions. But if you're around people who repeatedly have adverse reactions to you setting boundaries according to your own needs, then you can ask yourself the question, is the company I keep serving me? Some people haven't learned yet to receive appropriate boundaries. They might sulk, they might become manipulative, they might even become verbally abusive, they might try to convince you that there is something wrong with you. But we're asking you, be strong and always believe your own feelings, your own instincts, and not the interpretation of another. When you don't know anymore whether you're right or whether they are right with the observation of the situation, then it is time for both parties to take some time out. Time out can be very important in romantic dynamics, partnership dynamics. Otherwise it can get also very draining, and the boundaries can get very mixed and very all over the place. And when you're grounded, and when you have a healthy sense of boundaries, it's easy to practice the law of receptivity. It's a very simple law. It's as simple as when you're closed to receiving, it, whatever it is you've been asking for, cannot be given. You might have been asking for a loving, beautiful, supportive, nourishing relationship, but if deep down you believe that you don't deserve it, it cannot come. If deep down you believe that you have to work very hard for it, it cannot come. If deep down you believe that you have to give more than the other, it cannot come. If you believe that you're only the giver and the other one is going to be the recipient, it cannot come, because then you're not receptive. And a lot of people accidentally, unknowingly, get wired into being an over extreme giver. No one is being born saying, hey, in this lifetime I'm only going to give and I'm never going to receive anything, and then I think I'm going to be better than everyone else. That's not what's happening. This business of accidentally becoming a giver and too much of a giver happens as a consequence of incidents in your life. You might be in a giving profession. You might be a psychologist, a doctor, a nurse, a healer, a teacher. You might be working in the fields of childcare or taking care of the elderly, or any other caring, giving profession. And you do that so much, all day, every day, 8 hours a day, night shifts sometimes, for years, for decades. And eventually it's second nature that any interaction between yourself and another means you're in the giving role. Or another example could be, you might be a mother parenting your children on your own, and no one else is there to take care of them. So you're the giver and the giver and the giver and the giver for years. And so you're learning that is the energy dynamics that works in my life. In this instant it works, of course, but transferring that into potential romantic encounters can then become rather dysfunctional, yet it often remains unconscious. You might be the firstborn in the family and had to learn to look after all your little brothers and sisters. You might have had a parent who hadn't quite matured and grown up just yet when they gave birth to you. You might have had all kinds of constellations that set you up with the identity of I am the giver. But how about we let that go today? How about we let that go right now? How about we let some of that go with this breath? And some more with the next breath. How about making some space in your consciousness that receiving could be fun? And how about we created even more space in your consciousness? How about we'd come up with some ways in which you could practice receiving? We could call it allowing in some receptivity. How about that? And we're not asking you to receive 1 million, a houseboat, a vacation in the Bahamas. We can begin quite small. You could choose some experiences that you're willing to allow in today, tomorrow, this week, next week, soon. Some people are having a very hard time receiving a compliment, receiving a hug, receiving dinner, receiving a favor, receiving help. And we invite you to pause again and to ask you, are you willing to receive help? To let that in, to allow that, to be grateful for it? Or does it give you a feeling of embarrassment or a sense of incompetence? We would love to see all of you feeling extremely comfortable and at ease with receiving help, receiving love, without any discomfort around that. Could you create some space for that? Receptivity is a core quality of the feminine, and when that is blocked, the feminine cannot receive the masculine. And when receptivity is blocked, yet one is a giver, there always is an imbalance that sooner or later leads to exhaustion, disease, or any other noticeable symptoms. So giving yourself permission to receive can be just the one missing link to magnetize your partner, whether he's already in your life or not. And a good man, a high quality man, wants to give. He wants to be received. A high quality man is a giver who can also receive. So you can dance a very flowing dance of mutual giving and mutual receiving. And for some of you, we're really asking you again to open the door towards receptivity. For some of you, the door is open an inch or two, but we want it open all the way, so all the goodness that life has to offer and wants to shower you with can now walk through the door. Receptivity is possible when you're grounded, when you're connected to your body, when you're connected to life, when you're connected to your needs and wants, and physical sensations and emotions. Receptivity is easily possible when you have healthy boundaries, when you're not running around all day taking care of everybody else. Receptivity is possible when you know without the shadow of a doubt that you deserve to receive. Receptivity is precisely the energy and the quality that attracts a quality mate into your life. If you have no receptivity, no grounding and no boundaries, you could attract a mate, but most likely that's a taker who's gonna drain you, and that's not what you want. So let your mantra be receptivity, grounding and boundaries, and bring these qualities into your everyday life. Remember that you're worth it. And we thank you so much for your presence, for your attention, for taking that in, for considering these very simple suggestions.